Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So, people seem to want me to make more music related videos. So I don't know if this is going to be for everybody, but I wanted to talk about something to do with music, and that is the creative process of music, no matter what artist you listen to. There's a strange thing in music and creativity where I was listening to an interview from this lead singer of this band I used to really like back in the day, you know? And when they were like a new band, they had a particular energy about them. I don't want to mention the band because I feel bad at the idea of like, it's not nice to call people out. So I'm just going to say there's this band, and I used to really love them. They used to have a very energetic style, and they had this spark, this magical spark. And then at some point during their career, I feel like they lost that spark and they kind of became just another band. So for me, they used to be this special band that had this magical spark, and then they became just another band. But I was listening to this interview, and the lead singer was saying, during this interview, they asked them the question, when do you guys think you're at your peak live? You know, when you guys played shows, when do you think you guys were at your peak? And the lead singer said something. See, this is where it comes in, where it's like it's hard to have perspective over your own art. But he was like saying, oh, I think we're still there. We're still... The idea is he didn't want to admit that he ever had a peak and then they're past their peak. So he was like he was basically trying to say, we're still, what peak? Oh, we're still there. We're still trying. We're still up there. And it's like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like he didn't want to openly say, oh yeah, our peak was definitely around this area. That's when we definitely hit our peak. Because it's a weird thing to admit that you're past your prime or past your peak, Like I always talk about the fact that now every year I'm basically a shittier version of myself. And it's hard for people to admit that because that's not a positive, uplifting thing to say. Because physically, technically, what happens is that your DNA and everything inside of you doesn't replicate well anymore. So you reach a certain age where every year you're basically a shittier duplicate of yourself. Right? Which is why you start looking older. When you're in your 20s, you have perfect skin. It's smooth, it's shiny. And then in your 30s, your mid 30s, your late 30s, your skin starts to dry out. It starts to sag. All your DNA is literally just turning shittier. Your DNA replicates, and every year as you get older, it's like, when you copy a file and you move it over. Well, every time it copies that file, it's missing some data and it's like a shittier version. So you're literally a shittier version of yourself every year as you get older. It's not metaphorical. It's not whimsical. It's not artistic. It's not negative. It's not positive. It's like math. It's just a math equation. It's just simple math. So I always joke around about the fact that I know I'm a shittier version of myself a year because I can feel it and I'm not delusional about it. But there's always that one guy that's like, no, man, I'm 53 and I'm the best I've ever felt. Because you worked out. Maybe in your 30s, you were drinking 13 beers a day. Now you go to the gym so you feel better. But you should have felt way better in your 30s than you do in your 50s. You should never feel better in your 50s than you did in your 30s. That makes no sense. Maybe you were just really abusing your body in your 30s, right? The idea is it's just math equation. And that's the way it is with art with a lot of people. Bands are a strange thing. It's so strange because when you think of what makes a band good, I think, of course, there's the natural talent. When you look at every band you've ever loved, what made them incredible, not just good, is that for a particular moment in time, they had this magic combination of talent and a particular energy and a state of mind. And when you mix those two together, it's magic. If you look at any band, because think about it this way, technically, as you get older as a musician, you should be getting better. So your later albums should be better, but they're not. Why? Because you're getting to be a better musician, because the more you play, the better you get. Then how come your older albums are better? Well, because it's not just your ability to play, it's that mixture of your ability to play and your talent, plus your state of mind and your energy at that moment in time. And you have to have both. And the second that creative spark, that energy, that state of mind that you're in is gone, your art and your music suffers. It doesn't matter if you can still technically play well, because that's really irrelevant if all you're ever doing is playing well. It has to be blended with this magical spark. But what's ironic is very few bands ever just openly say it, like, yeah, we're definitely not as good as we used to be. Like, we had a magical spark back then. I remember one guy that did say it was Bob Dylan. I remember listening to an interview with him when he was very old. Like, it was probably like, it was an interview from maybe like the late 90s or maybe the early 2000s, and he was talking about like his days in the 60s and the 70s and the albums he wrote. And he openly said, I don't know who wrote those albums. That wasn't me. It's not me now. I have no idea. Sometimes I listen to that stuff. I listen to the lyrics and this just whatever is going on in those songs. I don't know who wrote those. That's not me anymore. And that's a powerful thing to admit. It's not a weakness to admit that you're past your prime as a band, kind of like referencing that lead singer for the band that I used to love. He just seemed like he just really didn't want to admit, like, oh yeah, we had our peak then. He's like, no, we're still there. And let me tell you, I used to love this band, and I mean love. And they're not there anymore, This lead singer of this band, I love this guy, he was a huge influence on me back in the day, but it's not, that magical spark is not there anymore. You're way past your prime. And it's okay to just be like, yeah, man, we had a magical spark then. We're still doing okay now, but here's what's really interesting. What's really interesting is that what I find is that not everybody hears that. To me, like when I hear almost any band, any artist, I can just scan their whole collection and I can definitely see the time period that they had that magical spark. And it's very apparent usually. Not always. There's some artists and musicians that kind of had like a genuine steady spark throughout. But for most, it's clearly obvious that they had this moment in time. And that moment in time could just simply be like one album or two albums. It doesn't have to be a very long period, but that moment in time is very, very apparent. It's an absolutely mind-blowing thing to see somebody with talent that's also inspired at that moment, and they're in a certain headspace. And you wonder what happens to bands and musicians when you listen to them later and you think, how come they don't have that thing anymore? Well, I don't hear the magic. The albums are still good. They're fine, but it's missing that magic. And what is that magic? I think that what it is that there's a certain headspace you're in as somebody who does anything creatively. And the second you start getting out of that headspace, there's a musician I really like, the guitar player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, John Frusciante, and he used to always talk about this idea. During the time that they recorded their album Blood Sugar Sex Magik, they lived in this. When they recorded their album Blood Sugar Sex Magik, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. Again, speaking of magical albums, why does that album sound so magical and why is it so good? Well, they were very talented, obviously. They're very talented musicians, but why was the album so good? The song so good, the energy, why was it just so special? Well, what they decided to do for that album is they rented this house and they all lived together in this house and they just played music and they recorded. This was just a time dedicated to the creative process of making this album. So they would record in this house. So right off the bat, when you have like a group of musicians, a band, telling themselves, we're just going to be here. We're going to be here right now. Our existence, our life is right here, right now. That instantly gets you in this magical place, right? And John Frusciante would talk about this idea that like, during the time they were recording that album, he can hear like spirits and energies and voices and sounds. And to most, that just sounds ridiculous, right? Because if you're very scientific and technical, you call that stuff woo-woo, right? Because anything you can't peer review for you is nonsense. Crystals, magical healing, dimensions where other entities live, all this stuff is nonsense to you because you giggle at it because it hasn't been peer reviewed, which is a huge flaw in any person who's scientifically minded. Be scientifically minded because it's great. Science is amazing. Science gives us the tools to understand the mechanism of how things work. But just because we don't have the ability to peer review something and study and improve it right or wrong doesn't mean you can giggle at it and pretend it's nonsense, because there's no way to prove it one way or the other. So there's no giggling involved. So this idea of like John Frusciante would hear these spirits and these energies, that's what I feel like creativity is like. You're literally connected to another dimension. And the more you're connected to this dimension, this place, the easier you can pull them in. Now, you know what connects you out of this dimension? When you get older in life and you have a family, you have kids, you settle down, you're changing diapers. This is all beautiful stuff. Like, I don't have a family, I'm not married, but I know 100% for sure if I was married and had kids, I would love it. In fact, I think that probably having kids is probably the most magical thing that could ever exist. I would absolutely love to have kids, right? But the idea is, it's when you get out of that dimension of creativity and you settle down and you're doing other stuff, whether you got a job in a corporate world and you're working 9 to 5 and you're too busy to be in that magical creative headspace, or you've settled down and you got married and have a family, you're going to like dinners with other people with families, you play dates with the kids, you're not in that magical dimension of artistry and creativity. And that's what usually happens to almost every artist I've ever listened to. They have this. See, because people always say, why is it when they're younger that they're so creative? How come like all these great artists, they wrote all their best stuff in their 20s, typically? Because that's when you're more free. That's before you've settled down. Everything to you at that point is just about your art. So you're always in this floaty dimension of creativity. But you know what sobers you up a lot? Real life, like real world stuff, like waking up and having to go to your stressful job. You know what kills creativity? A stressful job that you hate. Do you know what else will make you not be in that creative headspace? Dealing with the realities of life, like children, babysitting, go grocery, just doing regular stuff that people do, that whether they have families or and so you're young and you're in this free space and you create these magical albums, and then you get older and you get a family and then you have kids and then you still write albums. And I listen to those albums and a lot of times I go, oh God, my head hurts. It's so crazy to hear the same artist, the same band, and it's almost like they're a different thing. That just shows you how it doesn't matter how talented you are, how much capability you have, if you're not in that magical headspace. You have to be in that magical headspace that connects you to that other dimension of creativity. And without that, talent alone is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And it's a strange thing because, like I said, it's like you wonder like why. When I listen to bands talk about, like they'll release a new album, like long past their prime, and they're like, this is my best album. You know, like that's the running joke in music when a musician way past their prime, they're releasing albums, and then like in an interview they're like, yeah, I think this is like one of our best albums. I always wonder if like they're genuine, if they actually mean that, or what is it. It's a strange thing to hear from afar, because I think what happens is that we're so attached to our own art that I think it's hard for us to have perspective over our own creativity and our own art. It's almost like you're too attached to it to have perspective. So I think maybe like for other artists, when they write stuff, they might genuinely think that this is our best stuff we've done. Even though like you from the outside looking at it like, no man, I remember your stuff from before. They used to have this magical energy, and now it just, it's fine, but there's no magic to it. But yeah, to me, when you talk about music and when you talk about just music in general, whatever artist you like, to me, the only thing that means anything to me musically is if you have that, you gotta catch that moment of magic. That to me is, and it's like music without that spark or that magic, it's just sound that you record. And there's just such a huge difference. And sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's super, super subtle. What makes an album magical and what makes another album just like fine. But there's something there. Something there that's different, a spark. And I've always seen that in every artist and every band. I've always seen that period of time when they had a magical spark, and nothing beats that. You know, a lot of times people think I'm being harsh because like I'll listen to later albums by bands and I'm like, what is this? You know, like even the band that I don't want to mention at the beginning of the video, I said that like the lead singer was talking, and like sometimes maybe I'm a bit critical of their newer albums, and people are like, wow, you're really, it's just like I know what they created, so it's hard for me to, you know, it's hard for me to like, this just sounds like sound recorded, and what they did before sounded like magic. To me, there's just a huge difference, you know? I can hear one person playing guitar and I could be like, that sounds magical. And I could hear someone else playing the exact same song, and to me, it's just like, I don't feel nothing there. Sometimes it's subtle. But to me, I'm always looking for that magical spark in anything creative. To me, that's everything to do with creativity. It has to have an energy and a spark to it that's just otherworldly. Like almost like you grabbed that from somewhere else. Like, what is that? That's what I'm always looking for. And in art, I think it's the only thing that really matters. That magical spark, pulling something from somewhere else. And so if you're an artist yourself, if you're a musician, if you're a painter, whatever you are, I think that's the ultimate noble attempt to try to pull something out of some magical place and bring it down to earth. I think that's what we're all trying to do. And when you can do it, it's pretty amazing. And that's it. I'll leave it at that. So have a beautiful day. Bye.